All right, thanks again for coming out, gentlemen. Today we are talking about chapter 3 of Hogan's 5 lessons. So in the first chapter we talked about the grip, the second chapter we talked about stance and posture, and this is the beginning of the golf swing. So Hogan goes into quite a bit of detail to start the chapter with the waggle. And he was big on the waggle because it's a bridge between your address position and the swing. He was careful to note that the shoulders are not turning during the waggle, and it's very much hands and arms. So a good waggle to him gave him the sensation that we've already struck the shot before even taking the club back. So to start, he mentions the left hand is really the controlling hand for a right-hand golfer, and if we're going to keep the shoulders from moving and our left hand is in charge, we're going to have a little bit of a break in the right elbow to where the right elbow hits the front part of our right hip. And the upper part of our arms is going to remain rooted against the side of our chest. So without even hitting a ball, Hogan wanted us in this position with the right elbow brushing across the top of the right hip, breaking the wrists, and coming through. And he went on into more detail to say that the waggle really helps us adjust to the shot at hand. Therefore, you should not groove the waggle. The waggle's not so much going to be the same every time. It's sort of a small microcosm of the greater swing. And
but you're breaking the wrist.
There's a bit of a break in the wrist. You want to feel your right elbow brushing up against your right hip, and you want to feel this, he calls it an adhesion between the upper parts of your arms and your chest. So everything is working together, but you're feeling these small little pendulum-like motions. Okay, good. So this would be an example. When we get to the later part of the clinic, we'll clean that up, but it's...
Is it a little bit of a weight shift?
So the main thing he says is the shoulders are not turning on the waggle. We're really just trying to feel the club head swinging.
Okay, good. Okay.
And he goes on to say that it really gives us a running start into the backswing because it's just the backswing is just an extension of the waggle. So what does he mean by that? Well, all of a sudden, if we're going to make a backswing, if you would, I've got the camera going right here, I'm sorry. So if we're not turning our shoulders at all, we could hit the ball. You know, we wouldn't hit it very far. So if we just turn our shoulders as an extension of the waggle, all of a sudden we get more of a regular swing. So this is sort of a microcosm of where does this club want to go on the waggle. It kind of wants to go up in here, right? So if we waggle before our shot and then we step in, it turns out to be an extension of the waggle. That was a little bit of a hook, but I'll take it, you know, good enough. Okay, so if the waggle leads us in a running start into the backswing, what's the order of the backswing? Well, he goes into detail again. The first thing that goes, we've already been rehearsing it, the hands. The hands go, then the arms, then the shoulders, then the hips. And then the downswing next week is going to be the complete opposite. The hips are going to lead. But for today, we're going hands, arms, shoulders, hips. And it goes on to say the shoulders are always ahead of the hips as they turn back. The shoulders are turning almost immediately off the ball. And that actually causes the hips to open. So we want to feel a little bit of restriction in the lower body. The hips are staying kind of stagnant. As the shoulders turn, they'll break the hips automatically. He says that the hips should start turning automatically just before the hands reach hip level. So that would be about here. As we're turning, the rotation of the upper body is going to create the rotation of the lower body. So he really wants you to turn your shoulders as far as you can while keeping your head still. And you'll notice that to achieve this, it really needs to feel like left shoulder to the ground, right shoulder to the ground. That's going to allow you to keep your posture. But in the backswing, we're just thinking about pointing our left shoulder at the ground and trying to get the middle of your back square to the target. He talks a lot in this chapter about an incomplete backswing. Reason he's so... Yes, sir. Thank you. The reason he wants a complete backswing is because it allows the left arm to stay long and on plane. Here in a minute we're going to talk about this plane of glass, but if we shorten our backswing, if we don't have a full turn of the shoulders, this arm is going to get out of position. But if we have a complete turn at the top, your left arm should be parallel with your plane line. So the left arm, we want it to stay long throughout, and at the top it's going to be parallel to our plane line at address. And the only way we can do that is if we turn our left shoulder to the ground and get the back to the target. Perfect. He talks about a false backswing. He's saying most amateurs don't create this turn, even though they're capable of it. They get about a half turn, and then the arms and hands go up to the top, creating a false backswing. So he's wanting an amateur to only move the club as far as the chest turn will allow.
So he's just saying that the chest turns the club, not the hands or the arms turn.
In a previous chapter, he really wants you to feel like your left arm stays long throughout. It's not locked out, but it is long. There's not a lot of bend to it. And the way that we facilitate that is by rotating our back to the target. And a tip that he gave for completing the backswing is to feel your chin brush the underside of your shoulder. He talked about he had a worn out spot here about an inch from the edge of his shoulder. If you can get your chin to your left shoulder, you know that you've turned your torso about as much as you're capable of. Next in the chain is the hips after the shoulders. He's saying the biggest error most amateurs make in the golf swing is the too loose of hips. They're over rotating their hips. The reason he didn't want that is because you're trying to create this tension between upper and lower body. You might remember X Factor from instruction back in the early 2000s, where they're trying to get the hips to 45 degrees and the shoulders to 90 degrees. And if you get in this position, you can feel quite a bit of tension in your legs stored up. You feel it in your core. It's like a rubber band getting stretched. So he wanted people to put a club on your right leg like this, or you could do a stick, but as you're turning into your right side, this angle should not change. The right leg angle should remain the same, and that'll kind of retard the hips and keep them from going too far out of the way. So set the club like this with the grip on your right hip, and then just make some turns, feeling like you're turning into your right side, trying to get your shoulders to 90 degrees without moving that right leg. And that's going to allow your left leg to do what it needs to do naturally. If we know that the right leg the angle is fixed as we're rotating, you'll feel your pressure move in your left foot automatically. You're going to feel the pressure in your left foot move. Actually, we'll get to that in just a moment. But back to the hips. We're trying to reduce the turn of the hips early. Again, the shoulders are really making them turn. So it makes sense logically that the hips should only turn as much as this shoulder turn is allowing. The shoulder turn kind of carries it with it. A lot of people get the swing going too early down here and they get out of position. So if anything, he wanted less hip turn and more shoulder turn. It's going to lead to the proper chain of events and maximum speed. In terms of the legs, the hip turn is pulling the left leg in, he says. So my shoulders are turning, that causes my hips to turn, and that causes my left leg to come in. This is what he means by in, towards the ball. And the left foot is rolling. As we're turning, the left foot is rolling to the right on the inside of the sole. And the weight or the pressure in your left foot is going to go from the middle of your foot to the inside of the ball of your foot. So we can just rehearse this together where we feel set up 50-50, we're turning, we feel the left foot rolling to the inside and the pressure starting from the middle of the foot to the inside of the ball of the foot. And that's where this right hip drill really starts to get effective. If we know we want to keep this angle fixed and we're trying to move that way, all of a sudden it makes sense how we're bracing against the right side, we're turning the shoulders maximally, restricting the lower body. And he makes special note to say that the body moves the feet. The motion of the body moves your feet automatically. Okay, again, we'll rehearse this and go through this again individually in a moment. Body moves the feet. Right leg maintains its position with the stick drill. All right, and now we've arrived at the plane. The plane is the last part of chapter 3, and he wants you to think of it as a 3D road map of how the club should travel. So to start with, there's a backswing plane and a downswing plane. So the two plane swingers tend to have a drastically different backswing plane and downswing plane. Hogan was more of a one plane swinger where his backswing and downswing were both more or less on this plane, and you can think of it as a plane of glass traced through the ball up to the shoulders. So it's like I'm standing here, my head's poking out of a plane of glass, and the club is supposed to travel on this plane for the majority of the swing.
So your club is parallel with this. It never comes in or out. It's always on this plane.
Well, he goes on to note that to start, it's impossible to start with the club hanging in our hands. The club will not get on plane until you're about hip high. Okay. The shoulders are going to rotate on this plane. Some people it's easier to visualize than others, but I find that super helpful. If I'm just thinking I'm here and my shoulders are rotating on this plane, I find that to be extremely helpful. And again, as the arms approach hip level, at that point they're parallel to the plane. And then as we continue our turn up at the top, my left arm should be parallel with the plane. You see that angle? This matches this. So we're down here to start by about hip high. We're parallel. As we rotate and get our back all the way to the target, the left arm is totally on plane. And then at the end of the clinic, or the end of the chapter rather, he wants folks, once they have this idea of a plane in their head, this plane of glass where the club is tracing, he just wants you to hit some half shots. So he wants you to be feeling like the upper arms and the elbows are tucked into the sides. We got this plane of glass tracing up through our shoulders, and with the elbows tucked, he just wants you making half swings back and through, starting to help your brain visualize this club traveling on this plane of glass. All right, so let's get a couple piles of balls going, and we'll go through this individually, starting with the waggle. So let's hit a few, doesn't matter what club really. Let's just make sure we're following Mr. Hogan's recommendations on the waggle. I'll turn my camera off.